Today I had the pleasure to talk to Professor Dr. Nikos Salingaros, Professor for Architecture and Mathematics in Texas. He recently published a paper called Architectural Knowledge that include research findings that actually show how modern architecture makes us sick and also point in a new direction how architecture should better be. Yeah, hello Nikos.
Hello.
First, I would like to dive a bit in your biography, a little bit, not too long, and then we come to speak about the paper. So the paper we're going to talk about today is called Architectural Knowledge, and it's not yet published, right? It will be published in August officially, is that correct?
Exactly.
And I have the feeling it's a bit like a summary of previous papers that you published.
That is correct. Summary of previous papers that I have published, including work by other colleagues who are co-authors or not colleagues who are working in the same topic.
Yeah, I saw this paper has 199 references. So, I would like to focus on the finding part, as I said. But first, let's start. Why did you write this paper? So what was the aim of it?
Or it was just one in a series of papers that I felt like writing, that I felt the time had come to summarize a lot of findings that exist that are really fundamental to architecture and urban design that are unknown to architects, and because they lie outside of the architectural culture. And all of these findings are published in the psychology literature, the medical literature, urban planning literature. So these are not known or accessible to the architects, and especially architectural academia. They don't read the literature that presents this research, and even if they do, architecture students and architecture professors are not prepared by their education to even understand what these papers say, because these research papers are technical. So architects get very scared.
And they overall criticize, or they come, let's say they allow the conclusion that modern architecture is not healthy in the way it is, right, overall. So it partly like criticize modern or contemporary architecture, right?
Well, the conclusion is that architecture for the past 100 years, the accepted mainstream architecture is not good for humans. So when an architecture professor looks at such a paper, so they will look through and they say it's very scientific, they cannot read it, it scares them to read it, but then they read the conclusion and they get upset because they say, well, this conclusion is the opposite of what I'm doing, so this must be nonsense, so I'm not going to even pay attention to it.
Well, they want to reject it because they will question their own profession and their own capability of what they're actually doing, right?
So, precisely.
Yeah, as I said, let's talk a little bit brief about your biography. So the listeners, I call it more like a podcast, right? So listeners, although it will be on YouTube, know a bit about you. So the first question, I read that you were born in Australia, but you have a Greek name and you're living in the United States. So could you briefly explain us how that happened? So have you ever lived in Greece? Are you born there, or?
Yes, I was born in Australia of Greek parents, and I grew up in Greece and Australia.
Okay, so what age did you fully move to United States?
I came to the United States to do my university degree.
Okay, so you lived in Greece and Australia until, let's say, end of high school or something like that.
Yes.
Okay, and then I read you started to work with Christopher Alexander already in 1982.
Exactly.
I will show. I think most of our listeners or viewers know this name already, I think, on my channel. For those who don't know it, it's the author of the book A Pattern Language. I think that every architect should have in his architect office, because it's first of all very important to know. I think it's very good. I think I mentioned on my channel before, it's one of my most favorite and I think most important books on architecture, and it's really like a compendium. So when anyone designs architecture, it doesn't mean you have to use all of the patterns all the time, right, which are in it, but it's like how many 500 I forgot, a lot of what he called patterns. So like, I mean, every of our listeners, I think, should buy the book. It's still available on Amazon, by the way, also in Germany, in German and English. And it should be in every architect office. So I will show that here. And I think I put a link on that book and also on a few of your books in the video description. So you started to work with him in 1982. And I see a parallel already in the biography of yours and of him, because he originally studied mathematics, right? And a little bit science, and then also architecture. And I read that you actually studied physics. And so you have never studied architecture, is that correct? You master.
I have never studied architecture in a university.
Oh, yeah, formally in the
Yes, I have studied architecture on my own. And our Christoph Alexander's background is very much close to mine. We both studied mathematics and physics.
Yeah, I read that too, and that was also my first question. So, how did you come to know him or come to work with him? Did you know him? Yeah, how did that happen? So,
yes, in my youth, I began as a painter, so I was very interested in art and architecture, but not as a career. And I read widely, and none of the architecture texts made any sense to me because they were contradictory. And I discovered Christoph Alexander's works, his articles and his books. This was before the pattern language. And I remember the name as somebody whose writings makes absolute sense from a scientific point of view.
Yeah.
And then the pattern language was published when I was a graduate student, and I immediately related to it. And I thought, here is a person who understands architecture. So later, many years later, when I became a PhD, I was going to visit one of my students in Berkeley, and I called Alexander's house, and I went to meet him. It was very nice.
Really?
And we began to collaborate.
Okay, and that's but have you? It just say Wikipedia just says you worked with him. So was it on the academic side, or have you also worked in his like architecture practice or on his books? I saw you published his last, the Nature of Order. You published or edited it, right? I read.
Well,
so what was
let me explain. When I first met him in Berkeley, he told me, "Listen, I'm working on this huge book, my new book, and I need somebody to help me to edit it. And I'm getting no help from my architecture colleagues. They don't even understand what I'm trying to do. And those that even they don't understand, or they understand a little bit and they're opposed to it. So I need somebody, and it seems that you can help me because you are a mathematical physicist." So I started to work with him and help him edit it for about 20, 25 years.
This is the Nature of Order, right? We talk about that.
Nature of Order, yes, in 4 volumes.
4 volumes. I will link it also in the description. It's still available in Amazon. I think also in German even, but for sure in English in Germany and in Amazon.com.
Yeah, Sebastian, look. The pattern language is available in English and in German translation, and I should tell your readers, there's a German translation free available in a wiki. That's posted in Austria. Yeah, because the publisher of the German edition, Ein Mustersprache, has made it publicly available. The English one you have to buy. It's under copyright.
So it's on the Wikipedia. You said Austrian Wikipedia.
It's a special wiki that offers the pattern language free in German. Now the English, the Nature of Order, 4 volumes is available as a book anywhere in the world, as a paper book or as an e-book, but only in English so far.
So I will try to find a link for this German wiki. It's also interesting for me. I want to look it up, and I will post it under this video. I think I will post a lot of links also to this paper, by the way, that we will talk about. I will post. And by the way, for all of our listeners, I mean, this is let's say, people can have many opinions about this topic. So I want to invite our listeners to write your opinion on what you think. So as everyone knows, YouTube like comments. So I want this idea to be spread. That's why we're doing this interview now. So I read this paper, of course, already. And I want many people to know about it. So anyone who listens, please comment anything because it will show YouTube that the video is relevant. And by the way, I want like everyone to say which of these findings that we will discuss. I think it's 17 overall of this paper, Architectural Knowledge. Which of these 17 you find like, should be used more in current architecture, which you disagree with, or maybe you have other ideas. So I want users to comment what they like or dislike about it. I found out last time when we talked, Nikos, that you also like to argue, and you're not afraid of like conflict and discussion, right? So that's why I also thought sometime I might disagree too. I will say that too. And in other parts, I have to admit I haven't understood all of it. So I read the whole paper, and there are 17 research findings, right? We will discuss, and then conclusions. So I have to admit, I haven't understood all of it. But yeah, we will go into that in a minute. I think from introduction and aims of architecture, this is part 1 and 2, we should just explain the term adaptive design that's laid out in the paper, what it is. But do you want to explain in your own words? Because I think this is relevant to understand the rest. So how would you define adaptive design, and why is that important?
Adaptive design is design that is shaped to enhance human well-being and long-term health. Namely, it takes into account the state of the human body and the psychological impact and physiological impact on the user of these spaces, so that the design is adapted to optimize the feeling, well-being, and health of the individual. And so it adapts to the human body and the human mind and the human perceptive system. That's what adaptive design is, which is very, very different from a formalistic design, which is concerned with, which is what it is taught in architecture schools, concerned with shapes and abstract art and some philosophical notions and even political notions and ideologies. That's totally separate.
Yeah, when I read about this, separately in the internet, while I was reading your paper, I thought it should be better called like human-centered design, right? In separation to or distinguish from like object-centered architecture.
You're quite right. Yes, we can also call what we're trying to do human-centered design. It's a term we can take from Donald Norman, who defined human-centered design. It's the same thing.
Yeah, because adaptive design, my first question was adapting to what? So, and then I had to read in the internet, okay, it means adapt to the human needs. So that's why I thought like a human-centered approach instead of object-centered approach. Sometimes it's also even have like concept-centered approach, like Libeskind, or ideology-centered approach, like also like Gehry and Libeskind as well. So they have the idea, and everyone knows already how the building will look like when it's finished, including the architect and his team. So it's just another focus, right? Another question that you put at the first question, thinking about architecture, I think. Which is then the human. Okay, let's dive into it.
Wait, Sebastian. Yeah. One small point, but it's important point. Adaptive design also adapts to nature and the universe and the non-human.
Okay.
Whereas human-centered design, humans are very arrogant and they can create nice environments for themselves, but to destroy nature, that's not good. So adaptive should adapt to the nature of an entire system.
Okay, so more caretaking.
Yes, we have the plants, and we have the other animals, and we have the weather, the environment. Mm-hmm. So the architecture that my friends and I want to create respects, adapts to nature, and adapts to humans and the rest of nature, not just to humans.
Okay, understand. I didn't see that point first. Okay, so let's jump directly, I think, into the findings section, which is like, which are 17, let's say, findings, which you said already are mainly come from outside the discipline of architecture. So that's why architects don't know that. And let's start with the first. So the first refers to Christopher Alexander. Again, I guess it's called Design Patterns. And do you want to, I recommended that book already to our audience. So do you want to explain again how you meant, let's say, how you laid out this point, design patterns, in this paper regarding to the topic, architectural knowledge?
Yes, the design patterns are invaluable work that has been done to discover relationships that really help an architect design something, anything. Alexander and his research team at that time, several years ago, just looked at the most successful places and situations from the point of view of causing well-being and a good feeling and a feeling of being healthy. And they extracted what was responsible for this good design, and they wrote it down as a pattern. So a pattern is found in many different cultures, in different periods of architecture. And if you summarize it, which is difficult to do, I try to write some patterns, and it's not easy, it's very difficult to do. But if you extract the pattern that is responsible for one specific thing, then you can put that in a new design, and it helps towards adaptivity.
To the what? Say again, helps towards?
It helps to adapt your new design so that you can guarantee a certain percentage of success.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, you know, throwing coins in the air and expecting them to land all heads. It's impossible. So architects are trained, and they say, well, you create something new. You know, you design a bank by being totally creative. Well, that's ridiculous. It's impossible to get that. Whereas if you make a list of design patterns of the Alexandrian type that can contribute to design a bank, that are essential for the functions of the bank, the well-being of the employees of the bank or the customers coming in, these are geometrical ideas and constraints, and then the architect can put them together and has say 50% success already, and the rest is due to the creativity of the architect. But the architect starting from zero, say I'm going to design a bank with no preconceptions, the chances are 1 in a million that they will get something that's really nice.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's just really a difficult thing. I also thought about that myself, of course, when I like walking through the cities where I've been. So what is the underlying, what is actually the thing that I like about, let's say the Italian cities, for example? I mean, they're really like great small towns, right? Yeah, they're everywhere in Italy. So, and you can go basically everywhere you want. It's like a great neighborhood in the urban settlements. And then, so what is it actually? I also thought of what is it? I mean, I tried to lay it out in a few out of my YouTube videos, what I think these basic principles are. But I think the core thing that we have to point out, also these patterns in the book Pattern Language are like, you can apply them today. They're not bound to a style. So that's the important thing. And then you mentioned this in the later, I think it's already the second point in this paper we talk about, that these patterns are not linked to a certain style, right? You can exercise them in like any, let's say, look you want, right? So it's not
exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So this is the advantage, and this is, and what I want to add is also really difficult. I mean, when you go somewhere, for example, the cities in Italy, like Siena or whatever, and then I'm there. Okay, I like it, but why do I like it? So, and this is like really difficult. And even when you look as an architect student at one particular building, okay, so what's good about that now? Why do I think it's a good architecture? So, okay, as I said, everyone has to look in this book anyway, Pattern Language. And the second point, I think, is the one that I personally understand the most. It's called Classical and Traditional Architecture.
Yeah,
so
wait, Sebastian. Yeah, before you move on, you raised an important point. Why do people like buildings that have these patterns embedded in them? Whether they're in any style at all, it's independent of style, whether they're old buildings existing in Italian historic towns or in a new building that's built using the patterns. Why do people like them? Because those patterns touch our evolutionary biology. You see, the patterns evolved by trial and error, and self-builders made millions of mistakes, and each time they made a mistake in the past, hundreds of years ago, they never repeated that mistake. So there is a selection process of embedded patterns in the historic urban fabric. What you're seeing is the successful evolution after thousands of years, so that you come now after thousands of years and you feel good because all the negative patterns have been eliminated. People stop using negative patterns. So it's like an evolutionary development.
Yeah, like the distillation of history, the kind of that happens itself by itself, right?
Exactly.
Because, okay, I understand that. Okay, the second point, traditional and classical architecture. You want to start to summarize? There are some quotes that I want to read out of it one to one, because I think it's really, some really nail it, but maybe you want to summarize first the second point in your own words. Why is this relevant to the topic we talk about?
Yes. Okay. So there's a very quick way, but limited way to create beautiful and wonderful environments today. Just copy something that's traditional and from a culture. So you go
Copy
to any
something that works.
culture. Yeah, you go to any culture and you find something that's traditional. And what I just told you 5 minutes ago, it's traditional because it has evolved over centuries or millennia. So if you copy that, you have a certain percentage, a good percentage of getting something right.
Yeah.
The problem is you don't understand what is responsible. You don't understand the patterns. You don't understand the fractals or anything else. But it doesn't matter. For an architect, if you copy something traditional, and people have been doing that for millennia, you have a good percentage of getting something right that's going to adapt. Now, to make changes is difficult because you don't understand the mechanism behind it. So we have people today, in Indonesia, India, New Zealand, who are just copying traditional designs, and they make a pretty good product that feels good because you have the human dimensions. It is adaptive because you're copying something that's adaptive. Sometimes you make a mistake, but the mistakes are likely to be small and not huge.
Yes. Okay. You want to add something, or should I start quoting what I think is so important
please
about?
Start quoting.
Yeah. So what I find remarkable is that actually what I think my channel is mainly about, that I want to emphasize that we should not, or I think it would be even like wrong to just look, as you just described it, to just look at buildings, let's say from around 1800. For some reason, the classicism is popular for traditional architects, right? Like Quinn and Terry or others. So I think we should not just copy it one-on-one, but we should really understand, as I said before, what is good about it. So the pattern language is one thing, and then I try to analyze an abstract. I think I laid that, but these are my own thoughts. They're not like scientifically based. I just try to make my own, let's say, analysis of what makes classical architecture so successful and also loved by the people nowadays. And then I think we can translate that into the current situation. And what I want to quote of your of the second findings in the paper is that you wrote, so the classicists fail to present these ideas as a general knowledge because, and then you say, therefore people confuse the visual style with the underlying adapted knowledge. So that means people think something very concrete, they see something very concrete, like a column or a pediment, you said. Okay, so, okay, that's classical. Good. But they don't like see it in an abstract. They don't, how you say? Yeah, see it in an abstract way and extract what actually is the essence of it, right? So I think what you say here, that we have and should understand the essence of what makes classical architecture good and analyze that beyond the styles, right? Because you say architects confuse the elements like columns and pediments with certain styles. Is that correct?
That is correct, and that's unfortunate because both my friends, the classical architects, approach this as a style, but it's a good style, and also their enemies, say modernist architects who hate classical style, also identify it as a style and don't look beyond the style into the adaptive architecture that that the classical style gives you. That's why you see very successful classical buildings, which are the Greco-Roman styles with the columns. You see very successful buildings not only in Northern Europe and the United States, Jefferson, etc. The official architecture of the United States, but also in China and in Japan, you have banks and government buildings. They with some adaptation, and India and Australia, with some adaptation, you have some successful buildings. And those buildings are much more successful than the post-war glass boxes that the same countries now have imposed all over.
Yeah, I find this very important, that, I mean, because the criticism is often, you just copy then and we are not creative anymore. I said, first of all, I would say it's not mainly about your creativity as an architect. So it's not about you, it should be about the building. And I always, I don't get tired to emphasize that I think architecture is a service and it's not about like expressing your genius as an architect. So, but besides that, it doesn't mean you're not creative. It doesn't mean you have to, when you want to do classical architecture, it doesn't mean you look at something and copy it one-on-one. You're allowed to think, right? And as I said, you should should even think to extract what I said before, the essence of what is actually good about it, and to really understand it deeply. And there's still a lot of creativity in it, right? To create something new using this knowledge, right? And using these patterns and systems that you extracted when you think about it, right? As an architect. So, and I want to add something, what you said, this phrase like that, classicists confuse the certain elements with styles. I think this, even to be honest, applies even more to art historian, because I see that the subject art history, at least in Europe, is either taught by an art historian or by an architect, mostly by an art historian. But the latter, I think, art historian, they even tend more, to be honest, to really describe exactly what they see. And they also write their text like that. When they talk about a temple, let's say a Greek temple, they describe exactly what they see. But that's actually, in my opinion, not really what it's about. For architect students, that might be good for an art historian compendium or something, but I'm not an art historian. So I think when architects teach this subject, architecture history, it's getting a little bit better, because they understand the whole idea of the Greek temple, for example. But I think we should go even further. We should really, think it like really in its, think about every part and think what makes it actually great, right? What are the elements that we can extract and apply them today?
Yes, that's what I meant. Let me make one point clear. My friends, the neo-traditional classical architects who practice today are very flexible. They will take the Greco-Roman classical language and adapt it to the building that they need to build, say, headquarters of an insurance company. They're not going to copy the Parthenon. They will actually adapt to the modern materials and the functions and the relationship to the street, etc., etc. So these are not people who are fanatically reproducing Greco-Roman temples. They are adaptive. However, when you look at the discussion from the architectural history point of view, it is just stuck on 18th century description of Greco-Roman temples. And there is a prejudice as well, because when all those courses are taught in every architecture faculty everywhere in the world, the courses are taught, the Greco-Roman buildings are shown on the screen, and the professor says, these are very nice, but we cannot use them to create a new building today. And that's a horrible lie, and it's a prejudice that the students pick up. Of course, you don't have to make a Parthenon today, but there are so many adaptive design patterns in the Greco-Roman architecture that if you understood the patterns, you take them and you create something today. You know, you create a restaurant today, or a mini health clinic in a city in Bangkok.
Creativity is not even forbidden. So it's you still think as an architect, and you even, like, I don't want to say you express your own soul and needs, but you are creative, so you're allowed to be creative, right? So this is one prejudice.
Sebastian, you have to be creative, because every project, in order for the project to adapt to the human health and the human needs, you have to be creative. It's a very difficult problem. In order to make an optimal design to help the uses and to make the users feel good and the people who work in there feel good, you have to be adaptive and you have to be creative.
Yeah, that's right. I also want to emphasize that what you just said, architecture is actually difficult. I mean, I know it from designing it. I think in university, what I observe nowadays, I think professors are satisfied too early. So unless the student kind of meets the, let's say, the ideology, which is either like boring boxes or maybe something crazy like Gehry or Zaha Hadid, as long as he shows that he complies to the ideology, then the architect, the professor, that's what I observed, because I've been in several universities, including the one where I'm teaching. It's the professor will often say, "Oh, well, okay, good. Maybe you move this room a bit bigger or smaller," but he will not criticize the basic idea. And I think it's wrong, because architecture is actually difficult, and it's difficult to do. And as I said, it's really a service. So you have to meet the needs of the people who use it and who encounter this building, even like passing by every day. So it's a service, and it's difficult to do that, to do a good architecture, actually. Yeah, especially when you want to take into account like adaptive design, what we just talked before. So human-centered or fulfilling human needs. Yeah. Anything more about that?
Look, I have to say, I have to make a statement that's going to upset many of your listeners. I'm fully convinced that today you cannot learn architecture in an architecture school. You have to go outside the architecture school to learn architecture, because what's taught in the school is really irrelevant to adaptive design or human-centered design.
Yeah. I think there are some parts, I mean, like construction, engineering, and so on, and material knowledge.
The engineering, construction, the construction is separate. Okay, students get a good grounding in construction science, but I'm talking about the design part of the architecture.
Design part is right. It's for large part ideology, as I feel when I see something. So, okay. Do you want to add anything more about this second point, or should we jump to the next?
It's up to you.
Yeah, we have 17 now. We reach number 3. We have 17 to talk about. Maybe we don't have to talk in all of them about all of them like so deeply. But the third is called practice-based research. And to be honest, this is the one I understand the least, maybe because I do not know the literature. I think you mentioned here someone called Ashram Salama, and you also listed 3 of his books or publishings in the references. I saw them, but I don't have access to these books right now here in Bangkok. So that's why I couldn't look into it. So could you explain in your own words what that point is about?
Yes, this is yet another search for the same result. Research into practice that adapts to human well-being and human needs in a project. And this is a separate approach, but going in the same direction. So Professor Salama has done studies. He's a chair of a university department in the United Kingdom. And his work is highly respected, but still on the edge of architectural culture. All that I'm talking about is either on the edge of architectural culture, never in the mainstream, never appreciated by the mainstream, or totally outside architectural culture, which is even worse. So when you investigate the design process and the practice by doing investigations, say post-occupancy evaluations, by doing deeper emotional surveys during and after the design is actually built, then you reach the same conclusions that you reach with the patterns, from a different approach. So all these approaches are mutually reinforcing. That's the whole point of my paper, is that the people have approached this problem from different directions, and they all converge to the same result.
Okay. Anything? Yeah, I will look in his books and his publishings once I have access to that. Shall we jump to the next point, or you want to add something? Because always when I go to the next, you have. Okay, the next one, I know some parts of it, and maybe our listeners also already. It's called like Biophilia. So the headline of the section is results from Biophilia, or Biophilia, how you pronounce that in English? And
English is Biophilia.
Yeah, in German we say Biophilia. And okay, do you want to explain what it is briefly? I think maybe some of our listeners know that already, but still, what is it, and in which way is it relevant?
It has been determined by biologists and psychologists that the human being has a natural love of biological forms, looking at and interacting with biological forms and animals and plants. So this is the love of life and the love of not only living things, but the shape and geometry of living things.
Yeah, you list also very specifically the a few points. I think I will blend that in here in the video so we don't have to read all of it. But you wrote here sunlight, color variety. So that's actually why I feel always like quite sick already when I'm in the common architecture offices. You know, they have a black floor, white walls, no pictures ever, and these white desks and MacBook on it. So Mac computer. So it's so dead, and then white neon light. I mean, it's killing everything. Anyways, most of the offices, specifically architect offices, I think they're so proud of it that there's really like nothing in it. And I mean, I die after like 30 minutes in it. So it's like nothing to the eyes have nothing to orientate on, right? You feel like you're in the middle of a surgery.
Sebastian, listen, we could stop the interview right here and just discuss this one point, because this is really a fundamental point. Why do architects love dead environments that kill you after half an hour? Really. They love this. Why? This is perverse.
I don't get it. Yeah.
This is anti-biophilia. Why? Yeah. The human body evolved over millions of years in nature to love other animals. We love other human beings. We love our family. We love our children. We love cats and dogs. We love flowers and plants. This is essential as drinking water and eating food and breathing air. Why do architects want to destroy this connection of human beings? It is inconceivable.
Yeah, I don't get it. I mean, why do they like it? It's like, I mean, I feel like physically, like I get like problem. I feel my respiration like change my breathing, and it's like I can't work long in these environments. So, but here you mentioned already, you mentioned also an experiment which was conducted right about in a classroom, like 2 classrooms, one in the, let's say, normal classroom style, maybe not as horrible as the architecture office that I just described, but in a similar direction, like functional, let's say, in another classroom with students, I presume high school or something, which like do same exams or tests, and the other room is decorated like with leaves, or there are some patterns of leaves, even just I read on the windows, and they reach better results, right? So they can work much. And I think they also measured their body, how you say, functions like breathing speed and something like that.
Yes,
or was this? Yeah. Yes, so they even objectively measurable. That it's, and also, by the way, another story about myself. I also discovered that myself, because here now in Bangkok, I have my office, let's say in my condo, in my apartment, and in one room. And first I lived in the first floor somewhere, and I had trees around, and I feel like I really like to having trees in front of my apartment. I mean, it was like half of the whole floor. So, and because you have the shadows, and it makes me calm down when I have shadow, when the sun shines through the tree leaves, and these shadows, like in my room, make me calm down. And now I moved up to the 5th floor here in Bangkok, and there are no trees. So actually, I feel it. I feel a difference in my, how to say, I don't feel so relaxed in the office, where I'm in now. So I think this is also an example like that, right? Like shadows actually and trees make people calm down.
Yes, so Sebastian, you have just told me an explicit experiment of the biophilic effect. That's absolutely known. There are hundreds of measurements of the biophilic effect. The light coming through the leaves gives you a fractal pattern, so you have 3 components of the biophilic effect. You have the natural light, and you have the fractal breaking up, and then you have the trees, which are 3 components. So if you have that, it helps your health, your mental health. If you miss that, it lowers your mental health and well-being. And the important thing is that it's not your preference. It's not you, Sebastian. You like that because you have some personal preference. No, every human being, their body reacts the same way. And if you deprive them of the biophilic qualities, then over the long term, their resistance and response to invading pathogens and diseases is lowered, so they get sick more often. These are the medical facts that are discussed in some of the other sections.
Yeah. I mean, I want to point out these are like objectively measurable, let's say, factors. For example, like skin, how you call this, skin reaction. What's the medical term for that? And then breathing speed,
electrical conduction.
Yeah, that's the term. Yeah. So these are objectively measurable factors. And also like when people get more, I mean, and then also as this classroom experiment showed, like the results are worse. So they get worse grades. So that's also a tangible result, right? It's not just how I feel or what I like.
Oh, yes. Oh,
so
yes.
It's not subjective. And the third thing, I mean, the illnesses are probably not documented, but if people get more sick, it's also like, it's a measurable thing. And it's also, by the way, expensive in the end for health industry, right? And very unpleasant for the people who encounter that. So it's like, it's a tangible thing. It's not just what I like and what I think is beautiful. So I want to emphasize that.
Yes. Well, let me make something precise for the listeners. The long-term health effects, those basic experiments have not been done, because those must be done by medical professionals over a long term. And my friends and I have been publishing papers over the last 20 years, and we emphasize in the conclusion, these experiments need to be done, but so far no one has funded such experiments. And these, these have to be done over, say, a year, 2 years, 3 years. That's in the future.
Okay.
Hopefully somebody will fund such experiments.
Okay. Good. And the fifth finding in that paper is called results from mathematics. I think this is kind of your home domain, so I think you can explain that well. I mean, just to mention first, I think you focus on like symmetries and different forms of symmetries. So I think you do not mean symmetry only in, let's say, the common way how architects see that. That's basically draw a line and left looks same like right. So you explain different forms of symmetries there. Do you want to lay out, like, for, let's say, for listeners in an understandable way, because we are not mathematicians, right? Which kind of symmetries you mean there and how we can apply them?
Yes, there are many symmetries, and those arose, these are mathematics that arose biologically. Namely, there's the scaling symmetry, which is you take something and then you magnify a piece of it and it looks also complex, and then you magnify it even more and it looks complex or similar, and you magnify it and you keep magnifying it. You can magnify pieces of it 10 times.
Called fractals, right? Is it the fractals?
These are fractals. So they can be almost the same or just similar, or just have a similar complexity when you magnify it. And we see this in plants. Okay, so we evolved in the presence of plants, so we need to see these fractal scaling symmetries all around us. So these are plants. But that's the most primitive part of our brain. That's before we became humans. Then we have the animals. For an animal to walk, it has to obey gravity, and it has to be bilaterally symmetric, which means the mirror symmetry about the vertical axis. So we have two things here: vertical axis and then various symmetries across the vertical axis. Not a diagonal axis, not a horizontal axis, but a vertical axis. So these are multiple symmetries, and there are symmetries within symmetries. So you look at the face of the animal. We have a significant portion of the human brain that's not really the human brain, it is the animal brain, that we had to recognize an animal immediately. We had to look at the bush and see if there's an animal face there, because the animal either could eat us, or it's another human being that we could interact with, or it's an animal that we can eat. So it's almost instantaneous. The neural pathways are instantaneous, and they look at the symmetry. So you have the bilateral symmetry of the face, and then you have the subsymmetries, like the eyes. The eye itself is symmetric, and there are subsymmetries within subsymmetries. So it is highly complex. There's never just an overall bilateral symmetry. There is subsymmetries within subsymmetries. So this is called organized complexity. That's organized in a very complex way. And then, so now these symmetries, which are translational symmetries, which is you move the same piece in one direction, which could be a straight direction or along a line, or you have rotational symmetry, something going around like a flower or some plants. And you combine these with all the other symmetries, and you get something very, very complex. But when you analyze them mathematically, the complex, coherent object or environment contains of just thousands and thousands of smaller symmetries that are interlinked.
Okay. I have two questions about that.
For example, we have gotten too much into mathematics. Look at a great medieval cathedral, and you have the tower on the left built in 1200, the tower on the right built in 1400. They're totally different. But when you look at it, you say, this is such a gorgeous, coherent, symmetric cathedral. It's not symmetric, but it has 1,000,000 smaller symmetries in every magnification that make it coherent. But when you look at the from far away, the two towers are not the same size. But you
that's
don't
right. I
notice
mean,
that.
I reckon like Notre Dame is also an example, and sometimes even the doors. And
you don't notice that because the human brain doesn't care about the overall symmetry. You know, like a glass skyscraper. We don't care about it. We care about the 1,000,000 interlocking symmetries on the intermediate and smaller and smaller and smaller scales.
Yeah. Okay, good. Then I have two questions about that. I understand that, but if we look at the fractals, the first thing you mentioned, it can be also. Do they always need the second form of symmetry you explain, and if not, how can we apply that in architecture? I mean, I understand the second one. For example, when you look at a facade, a classical facade, we have sometimes an overall symmetry, but I pointed already out in my videos that you do not need even the overall symmetry. But then let's say every door, every window is symmetrical. And then we have also the risalit. The risalit in itself will be symmetrical. This is what you mean, I think, in the second point. But the first one, the fractals, how could we apply that in architecture?
Well, the fractals apply to give you the borders. And now we touch upon Christopher Alexander's The Nature of Order. So he derives some 15 geometrical properties of coherent structures, and one of them is wide borders. So if we're looking at fractals, you want smaller and smaller pieces to coexist and reinforce each other. So if you have a door sticking in a wall does not have intermediate symmetry. So you want something smaller than the door width. You can have door panels. So the older beautiful doors have 3 door panels. And then you can have the border around the frame of the door. Older doors have a beautiful frame, and it's not a tiny 2-centimeter frame. It is a 15 or 20-centimeter frame, a really nice frame. Why is this important? Because that creates the level of scale in the fractal, because you're going from the door to smaller and smaller and smaller, and then you have some trim on the actual border of the door, on the frame of the door. It's not just one piece of wood. It is it has articulation, so you have a smaller structure. So mathematically, you're building a fractal. Now, what is happening in the human brain, you don't notice all of this. It has an unconscious effect. When you are in a room and you work on your laptop, sitting and you're looking at the door, if it's a modernist door, it doesn't give you anything. It just stresses you. It tires you out. If you're looking at the beautiful door with a nice frame, the way I described it, with fractal articulations, then you don't notice it, but you are happier to work and you get less tired. This is a phenomenal effect.
Yeah. Okay, good. And then I want to ask also, I thought a lot about symmetries, of course, because relevant for architecture. And I actually thought, okay, we have it in animals. You gave one reason already, because they have to run, and you can't run if it's asymmetrical, it doesn't work. So, but I also thought about it, and the first question would be, besides walking or running, another reason that it's symmetrical, for example, a face. And first that. So I thought about it. Do you know other reasons why and plants, for example, are not symmetrical? So why are animals symmetrical in faces and so on?
Because the word animal means a moving thing. In order to move, you need to be symmetrical to have the motion on some sort of a leg.
So it's really only the moving quality that you're able to.
It's not only the moving quality. The whole process of digestion. Animals eat food. They have a digestive system. Digestion works by gravity. It pulls it down. Okay, if you lie down, you cannot digest your food. Gravity pulls down the food through the digestive system. It pulls. the water goes to the kidneys, the fluids go to the kidneys, and and then you urinate. The whole metabolism of an animal depends upon the vertical symmetry.
Yeah. And that needs to be symmetrical, but the digesting system, if you look at the, how you call this, is not exactly, what's the English term? The intestine, right? They're not exactly symmetrical.
Well, there's no need to be exactly symmetrical. In fact, it would be stupid because you have to fit so many organs in the body. So there's a nice compromise, a brilliant compromise in animal bodies, because there is the asymmetry that permits all these various systems to interact and occupy the space inside the body in the most compact means possible. It's a marvel of design, the animal body and the human body.
Yeah. Okay. And good. And then, I was also thinking about that, why people like to look at, let's say, symmetric buildings. And then I always say, okay, faces are symmetrical. Now you also explained it with the fractals, like, let's say, every nose, every mouth. That's how I understand it, right? Is symmetrical. So that comes out of you explained it now, I think.
And okay. Look, since we're on the topic, there's something else.
Yeah.
It was essential for human survival or animal survival to be able to recognize a face, because the face of another animal or the face of a human contains the information that means life or death to us. If we see if we see a lion, we need to recognize it's a lion, because it's going to eat us. If we see another human being, then this is responsible for a social evolution. We need to immediately understand and interpret the intentions of the other human being, whether they're hostile, friendly, how we interact with them.
But I was thinking, why nature express itself symmetrical always in living, let's say, animals and humans, always in living creatures and not in plants. So plants are, let's say, a tree is like slightly symmetrical. I mean, it's organized around its center, but it's not exactly symmetrical. So I was thinking about this. Why are living creatures symmetrical and plants are not? So
it's just the mechanics, the physiology. A tree doesn't need to be symmetric, but if you take a tree and you take the integral of all the leaves, you get a perfectly symmetry. It is just distributed. The distribution of the tree is perfectly symmetric, except in rare cases when you have trees growing on the edge of a mountain. There's a lot of wind and it blows them, so they're permanently crooked. But all trees, if you take the area integral, people can take the integral, of all the leaves, it is perfectly symmetric because it has to be balanced. You don't want to put undue stress on the roots. So the roots are best, can keep up the tree if it's perfectly symmetrical in the average, overall. So you take the integral of the leaves and it's perfectly symmetrical.
Okay, good. And then, the next points in the findings is headlined Geometrical Lessons, from Alexander's The Nature of Order. So this is to be honest, I haven't read it yet. I have a PDF version, and I don't know if it's legal or not, but I have a PDF version of all 4 volumes on my computer. And I looked into it, but to be honest, I haven't understood much of it. So do you want to explain I know it's a large work, but do you want to explain as brief as possible?
Yes, well, since I'm the principal editor, I will tell you, it's 2,500 pages.
Yeah, okay.
And it is well worth reading if you want to understand architecture.
Yeah.
But let's summarize it in 30 seconds. In volume 1, Alexander introduces discoveries that he made, 15 geometrical properties, or 15 fundamental properties, which are geometrical properties, that he has discovered in every living entity, either objects or inanimate object or beautiful artifacts or beautiful architecture. And these geometrical properties are common. So this is now a totally different approach to what we're already talking about, how to create adaptive architecture. And if you apply these 15 properties, you can get a good percentage. So you can get 40% good results towards adaptive architecture just by applying these 15 properties. So here you have another.
Can you mention or explain some of them? I mean, maybe not all 15, but for example, what
I have already mentioned the wide frames. So if you build a window, you need a wide frame. If you build a door, you need a wide frame. If you build a
wide in the terms of not small, not narrow, like wide in the dimension, right? As you explained it before.
Well, yeah, wide because it has to form a separate scale in the fractal scaling. So it has to be, you know, like a third or a quarter, you know, not 1/20th. It's too narrow if it's 1/20th.
Yeah.
The fractal scaling goes by a ratio of 3 or 4 but not 20 or 30.
Okay, good to know. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And another of the properties is another way of saying fractals. Alexander calls it levels of scale, which is what we have been discussing. So when you create a fractal, you have levels of scale, and those scales have to be nicely ordered, and you have all of the scales. Say you have 1 centimeter, 3 centimeters, 9 centimeters, and so on. You know, you multiply by 3. The number 3 is not important.
Yeah.
But it's important to have, so you don't have a gap. You don't have something
the same factor that's multiplying by the same factor always.
Yeah. So it is important that you don't have a gap in the geometry where you have a wall that's, say, 4 meters wide, and then there's nothing there until you get to 2 centimeters. That feels unnatural, and it is unnatural because there's nothing like that in nature. You know, only some meteorite or some monolith in the desert. You know, those are very rare instances. So, you know, if you have a wall, you have to have some panels, and you have the doors and wide frames and some trim and moldings. You know, all these words that I'm telling you are parts of traditional architectures. Not only European architecture, but, you know, the architecture of Indonesia, the architecture, you know, of South America. These are all naturally evolved parts of traditional architecture. You have these subdivisions, the levels of scale, which is exactly what Alexander mentioned. It is only the modernists that wanted to eliminate the levels of scale.
Okay. Can we have one more of these 15? I mean, so far I understand it. There were 2, right? Or it does it all build up?
Another property is alternating repetition. Namely that many things have to repeat, but if they repeat monotonously, they give you a headache. It's boring. It's more than boring. It makes you ill. But if you repeat something that's complex and alternated by something that's complementary, then you are comfortable with an alternating repetition.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's also what we see on some classical facades, right? They do that already, probably automatically without like having analyzed what they're actually doing, the architects, before.
Exactly.
What we talked before, like about because they applied patterns that worked, and they probably didn't know why they work, but they know that they worked, and they know what didn't work. So they just applied from what they know, learned from their from generations, right?
Yes, Sebastian, the traditional architects use their own body as feedback, as a sensory instrument. So they create something. If it doesn't work, they change it. So what we see today is what works. It's what makes you feel comfortable sitting in a room or in the facade of a building. This is what works. And this is what has been selected because it works.
Okay, good. I think we have to a little bit speed up because we talk already 1 minute, and we are now in 6. We have covered 6 out of 17 points. Do you want to? The next is called genetic material. Do you want to very briefly summarize what that is?
What that means? No, skip it. Skip it.
Really? Shall we skip it? Yeah. Okay. Good, we can skip it too. And the next one, I think we should not skip because I think some of our listeners have seen that here and there already because they circulate. It's called Results from Neuroscience. And no, sorry, the heat maps are the next ones. I thought now come the heat maps already. From Neuroscience. Should I point out what I find relevant first?
Yeah, please.
So I marked here a few parts of it, which I also feel very much myself, because it says, for example, one example that I find remarkable is it's called a negative positive asymmetry in the feeling, which is like also, how you say, evolutionary based, probably, as you just explained, other evolutionary based perception of our environment and also architecture, then the conclusion, what you just laid out before. And it says here, which I didn't know the number before, but I feel that perfectly for myself, that our sensory system weights like negative stimuli several times higher than positive stimuli. And you write here also around 6 times. I mean, I didn't know it 6 times, but I feel that also or myself. So for example, when you're like in a positive environment, let's say everything feels peaceful and sun shines in and you feel relaxed, okay, that's fine. But once like something goes wrong, you could also say like small things can destroy the whole harmony, right? Let's say a loud noise or let's say not even loud noise, but something that feels dangerous. I think this is the core point. So it must feel threatening somehow subconsciously to your existence. Although you like consciously, you probably know you're safe in your room and you will not be eaten up now. But like subconsciously, the noise, whatever that is, it might feel strange and doesn't even need to be noisy, I think, or loud, can destroy the feeling in your body. Is that the summary mainly?
Yes,
That's what I feel too.
that is correct. So for your listeners, let me outline the origins of this, which is the evolutionary survival. If you see a potential mate that you're attracted to, that's a positive attraction. But if you don't approach, if something happens and you don't approach the mate, you can find them again and you can approach them again.
Not so urgent. There's no urgency.
There's no urgency. But if you see a lion, you have to run away immediately. Otherwise, you're eaten and you don't get to reproduce. So that's why the negative is weighted much more, several times more, because you need to react to the negative rather than to the positive. The positive can wait. You get another chance.
Yeah. So I mean, I also like. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, as far as the architecture is concerned, this has huge consequences, because if you have a beautiful city, a traditional city, and you build some deconstructivist museum in the middle of a city, it's enough to destroy the entire center, the historic center, because people get repelled by the deconstructivist building. It's alarming, and it ruins the entire environment because it counts for 6 times more.
Right, and I can give another example which is not so obvious, but like from city planning, let's say in the 1950s, after Second World War in Germany, for example, Hamburg too, my hometown, they built a large, they call it East-West Street, because it describes exactly what it is. It cuts a large gap through the old historical town of Hamburg. I don't know if you've been there. So it's cut into 2 parts. And now the point is, it's still broken. So let's say practically now citizens use only the northern part where the town hall is located, and the south would be technically the center. But but it's not accessed. But it's not just functionally the big street. But I think it's really important, because 2 large spaces, and that's also in the book of Alexander, Pattern Language, 2 large spaces make you feel, how you say, threatened, because you potentially you can't feel safe, right? Because you potentially can be eaten up all the time. Is that correct? So I mean, in these 2 large urban spaces, it can be even one street, with like 4 lanes and then a big wide, if there are no trees planted, like on the Esplanade or something, or so if there are no trees, then you unsafe, and this makes you already do not want to go there anymore. So I think people will avoid 2 large urban spaces. Is that correct? That's what I'm feeling and observing.
That is correct, but now we run the danger. The danger of making our discussion too long, because you have opened a new topic, which is urban planning and urban design, which is full of disastrous mistakes, just as disastrous mistakes on the architecture that we have been discussing. So urban design and urban planning have been destroyed after the Second World War, because you have planners sitting on a desk drawing cities that they think will work, that don't work, because they violate all the patterns. And then the governments and industry giving priority to the car, cutting roads through historic city centers, ruining the pedestrian environment that gives life to a city center. It's another topic that's a total disaster, because planners did not consider the human being. They plan on a computer screen.
That's
They say,
correct.
"Oh, this looks nice," but how about the human beings? Human beings have to live here. Millions of human beings,
okay, you're
live in
right.
tiny cities that are monstrous, disastrous. It's not. There's
That's
no
right.
place for
You're
human
right.
beings.
Okay, yeah. Okay, I think the next point we should mention for sure, because I can illustrate that greatly also here on YouTube by showing these images, and I think people will understand immediately already. And I presume like some of our listeners have seen these already, these like heat maps. I will show them here in the video. So this basically the finding where it was analyzed with basically eye tracking, right? Eye tracking, and I think you mentioned here, or you mentioned in the next point that I mean now the methods are like with like how you call this virtual reality, right? So it's basically eye tracking measurements that show like that, yeah, basically what these heat maps will show that I will blend in here, that like how you wrote like two plane architecture, let's say, how to say that, if there are no details, nobody gonna look at it basically, right? So that's the summary, right? So if it's just a plain glass facade, you will like ignore it, or I would like add, you would feel uncomfortable regarding to what we just said before, because I would say it's potentially like threatening, because if it's a plain wall of something, you can't even understand it and don't know, let's say, what's behind it and if it's your enemy or not, something like that, right? So do I get it right mostly?
Yes,
Or?
that is precisely, that is correct. The eye is attracted to organized complexity, organized detail, not just detail, but it has to be organized detail to draw the eye's attention. So you can label that as ornament as well. Either there is structural detail, structure that requires some complexity that you observe, or you have to have the ornament in order to attract the eye, and then the eye finds this large structure, which is the building, finds it interesting to look at, and feels at ease, feels a connection, empathy with the large structure. A giant skyscraper that's just a glass curtain wall, we cannot empathize with that. It's an alien structure that's large, and it is menacing because it is so large, and we cannot empathize with it because we have evolved, and architects forget this. We have evolved to empathize with and interpret plants and animals and rocks and natural structures. We are not prepared with our evolution to relate to giant concrete buildings that have no, that have just a brutalist wall, or the giant columns that are 2 meters wide in
Basically not the human scale, basically it's
diameter.
inhuman and have lost the scale.
Monstrous, inhuman scale, and surfaces that we cannot relate to because they are they have no color, they have no detail, they have no, this rough texture of brutalist concrete. It repels us, and yet paradoxically, this is what architects love, and they promote.
Because they got trained like that to love it. And I think when they enter, we talked about it last time in our last talk, when they enter architecture school, they also don't like it, and they got trained to like it, right? Because I don't know why, but this is the kind of what we call, or what I would call, like brainwashing process in architecture schools.
Yeah, let's not touch that controversial
I think we
topic.
got like we both get passionate about that. Yeah, I think so the next one we are in the 10th finding already is the direct medical measurements. We briefly mentioned that already before, skin conduction and what else. So that basically you mentioned already, no, you mentioned in this finding section that in the previous times it was difficult to measure that, and now it has like more quite recent new technology that allows easier measurement of these like factors. If you expose, let's say, probants, you said in English, right? Probants to like, if you expose humans to like, let's say, modern environments or classical buildings. So basically you can measure what happens in their body, like physically. Well, we talked already before about skin conductance, respiration rate. I read it here from your paper, and the heart rate and so on. So you can basically measure their body functions while they're exposed to certain forms of architecture, right? And that's like an objective finding, I would say, like objective measurable fact. Correct?
Yes, this is a revolution in experimental techniques that make possible very easy data gathering about the environment, because for the first time ever in history, you can wear something. You wear some glasses, or you wear a wristband, or you wear a ring, and it measures all these body indicators. And the body indicators either show alarm and stress, or they show calming effects. So you have many groups, or as we speak, many groups are doing these experiments, and they expose people in traditional rooms with all the mathematical attributes that we have discussed in this conversation, and they have the same group go to a modernist room, and you see this huge difference. So every single research paper that I see published agrees with the findings. Namely that you feel uneasy. Now the funniest result is the following: you get a trained architect, and you put these measurements, you put these apparatus on him or her, and then you take them to the traditional room, and then you take them to the modernist room, and then you ask them which is better, and they say, of course, the modernist room is better. Traditional room, is terrible. But then you show them their own body. Their own body prefers the traditional room.
Really, even for them. Okay, I was thinking already maybe it's too, let's say, deep in their blood, let's say, that their body reacts like positive to the modern one. I thought maybe that could be the outcome. But you mean even the body?
You cannot change the DNA. You can suppress, you can teach these people to suppress their signal from the body that say alarm, and to reverse it, and then to intellectually impose a liking, and to say, I like this. But their body reacts the same way, because the body comes from the DNA and the neurological structure.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very rational thing. Like, I mean, this whole modernist thing is very theoretical. I mean, it started off very theoretical. So let's do this and let's follow only function. And I don't get tired to repeat that pre-modern architecture also was built on function. It's nothing new. So, but it doesn't mean you should throw away everything else. I mean, it's a very, let's say, it was a very abstract thinking, right? Like same like postmodernism too, but we don't want to get into that now. So that was like abstract concepts, and then you like think, okay, this could work in reality. But the reality is not like, I mean, it's much more complex than just one abstract idea, right? Like modernism or postmodernism was.
Yes, Sebastian, let's take a 30-second side trip to get rid of this word functionalism. The modernist this was used in a propagandistic way. There is no improved function in modernism. It just looks more functional. It is superficial. It's not more functional.
That's functional. I mentioned that before,
But for hundreds of years, traditional architecture functioned very, very well. That's why people kept building it. The modernists took the word function and used it as a propaganda tool. It has nothing to do with functionalism. It's all a big lie. But they made many commissions, and they took over the architecture schools by using this lie. There were masters of propaganda.
Right, and I pointed out in another video already that even like during 19th century, new like building forms came up. Let's say more theaters or opera halls, and of course train station and subway station, and all that could be covered, or let's say exercised with the pre-modern, or that time contemporary, now classical architecture, right? So the classical architecture vocabulary and grammar was actually capable to so far adapted to even like let's say create a train station or anything new like hospitals or schools or whatever came up. So there were many new like building functions arise in the 19th century, and they could all be covered with the vocabulary and grammar of the existing architecture. So there was actually no need to throw away all this history in the, let's say, 1910s and 20s. So it worked. I mean, these train stations work. So from the 19th century, I just want to point it out, and hospitals and whatever they work.
Yes, thank you for pointing it out. And let me give you two examples. The baths of Caracalla from Rome. a Roman bath with hot water and steam room. It was copied to create Pennsylvania Station and also the Milano Terminus Station. It works very nicely as a train station. Okay, the Roman baths work very nicely as a train station. Okay, that's adaptivity without getting into modernism.
Yeah, even that. Okay. Yeah, right. Okay. And then I think from 3.11, I mean, findings 11 onwards, you mentioned the new tools we have, like virtual reality and AI, ChatGPT, and so on. Do you want to summarize those points like together, or is it too superficial to like, how you say, merge them into one?
I think it's important for the audience to know, because now we have these sensors, tools, wearable tools, either eye tracking that you wear, you just wear a pair of glasses, or the monitors, the body monitors, heart rate, electroencephalogram, these are light wearable sensors, which are revolutionary because they're miniaturized. So you can be in an office or a laboratory, and you wear these and you experience environments on a large screen. That's virtual reality. Or you can wear virtual reality glasses, but you can just have a large screen, and you can do these measurements, without going outside or visiting historic city centers in Italy. The virtual reality and video is good enough to do these experiments. And so there are several studies already. And what are the results? Exactly what we have been talking about. Traditional environments with these properties, the healing properties are much preferred, and they're good for the human body versus modernist and deconstructivist environments.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. That's what we talked already before. I'm just going through that list, and I see actually the 13th finding I would like to point out separately, because especially for all interested listeners I mean, we will link this research paper, right? And there's a very large reference list, like 199 references, and there are like several starting from 120 in the section where actually like, how to say, studies are like displayed, which like show actually like user preferences and you name it here, like post-occupancy evaluations, right? So actually, like, I just want to say like hard facts, how the common public, the broad public, see classical or modern buildings, and they're also like, you call it like evaluations, post-occupancy evaluations, like studies how actually buildings work, so which work and not. So I just want to point it out for all. I think we have some interested listeners. You go into the references if you're interested, and follow up from 120 onwards, reference 120, I think, until 135. So there are plenty, you collected plenty of materials of these surveys, right? Which shows exactly that.
Yes. I think your listeners should be told the following: that starting from the 1960s, you had post-occupancy evaluation, namely after the building is finished, then you have one or more group of people who go through the building, and then they have a sheet of paper, a questionnaire, and they ask, do you like this part of the building? Do you like coming in? Do you like the spaces? So, and they give you the preference. Now, if they don't like it, then the architects will say, well, these are ignorant, stupid people because they don't appreciate nice architecture. So it was very easy to dismiss post-occupancy evaluation. Today, we don't need to do post-occupancy evaluation. You take the same people and they wear these portable apparatus, the instruments. And then you see that the body is responding. So you cannot say it's somebody's opinion. The body is responding. The physiological, neurological response is showing you that they like entering and going through these spaces. Or they get anxious. The body reacts with alarm and anxiety. So this is a terrible building. Nobody can question that.
Yeah, but I think I also want to point out, I think what you mentioned already, these opinions of these people should be taken into account, because these are these people who in the end have to, in the worst case, it's a dwelling building, right, for personal private living, and you have to live in it. And I mean, you have to go, so it's your home, you have to go into it even when it's an apartment house every day. And if it's an office, you are there pretty much, I mean, a vast majority of your time. So that means it actually like really, I mean, even so architects, as you mentioned already, tend to say, oh, they're not expert, they don't know anything about it, they're just like lay person, as you mentioned in this paragraph, right? So they don't know anything about it, and they don't take the opinion seriously. And this is also like, I find so arrogant about the early modern architecture, that the architects say, okay, we have to educate the public, so we have to educate the people because they don't know it yet. And it's like so arrogant to do so, because now it's like 100 years later, and still people have to live and work in houses that they don't like. So I think even when they're not educated architects, of course not, but I think we should and have to take the opinion into account, right? So and that's why I like these studies that I mentioned here. So and yeah, I want to mention like just a clear example for everyone who might disagree with me. I think the worst and very obvious and an interesting fact we have in the so-called, like, I mean, classical, or in the music, right? In everything from Schoenberg onwards, nobody want to listen to that. And that's so obvious. Like architecture, you can't avoid it. I mean, you have to go to a shopping center to buy something. So it looks as it looks. But nobody's going to listen to anything, let's say, post Schoenberg music. Then, I mean, now we have pop music, which is like totally different. And even in the movies, let's say they use 19th century composing techniques because they want them to watch their movies. If they use like what is done nowadays, if you go to a composition faculty, and we have, by the way, also well-renowned one in Hamburg, Music University. So if you see what the students do there for their whole composition studies through, it's horrible, and nobody want to listen to that, and nobody does listen to it. I just want to point it out, because you can avoid it. You can just listen to something else, and it's a totally la pour la. I mean, nobody wants that. So I just want to say, in architecture, we are exposed to it. We can't avoid it, but where we can avoid it, let's say music, nobody gonna listen to it, right?
Thank you, Sebastian, for drawing the analog to music. It's exactly parallel what's happening in music, and people will not listen to music that makes them feel uncomfortable. Why listen to it? Music is something beautiful. You listen to it to feel better.
Yeah, right.
And so the same thing is happening in architecture. But back to the arrogance of architects, it really makes me sick to see that for 100 years, architects in positions of making big decisions and for directing what is taught in architecture schools show a contempt for ordinary human feelings. And this is just sickening to me, and we don't need to get into that. But what I would say to the audience who's listening, the human body has the tools to judge. Listen to your soul, listen to your heart, listen to your body. Trust that. Don't trust the experts who are sitting in the prestigious architecture schools, or even worse, the sold out architecture critics, because they get paid by envelopes of cash by the famous architects. You can just throw out all those architecture critics because they're just paid propagandists. I'm sorry to say, but they do a tremendous amount of damage, because the ordinary person visits, let's say, a new art museum, and they feel sick entering the new art museum, and they feel sick inside the new art museum because of the spaces. And they read in the ordinary newspapers, not even the architecture press, in the ordinary daily newspaper, this is a work of genius. This is the greatest building ever built. And then they get cognitive dissonance, and they say, I must be totally stupid because I don't appreciate this. When I'm there, I feel sick, so I must be stupid. This is really a disservice to humanity. It's a horrible thing. It's totally unethical, and it's a horrible thing that's been done in order to promote inhuman architecture.
Yeah, that actually leads to my, I think, I wanted to close this interview anyway with the question that it leads to already now. So kind of what's next, besides what we're doing now, this interview on my YouTube channel, how can we promote that further? So I wanted to ask what are the obstacles? I mean, that's obvious now that, contemporary architects want to continue what they're doing. and want to defend that. But I mean, so what's next? How do you think? I mean, how can we distribute these ideas that you laid out in this paper and that we talk about now? How can we distribute that further, and how can we reach more audience beside this video on YouTube that we're doing right now to be informed about that?
Yes, well, there are several points to make here. First of all, the public needs to realize that they don't know, needs to realize, ignore the mainstream media when they talk about architecture, because they are just giving you propaganda that's misleading you. Follow your own intuition. Second, be aware that there's an enormous amount of work that exists, but it's on the margins of architecture, not in the middle of architectural culture. All that is rotten. On the margins, you have good architects who are doing very nice new work that is human scale and it's adaptive, but you have to look for it. You have to look on the web to find it. If if you go to the mainstream, they give you the same old garbage. And then look at all the references that I give you. They're on the margins, and they're slightly even outside architecture, into the medical field, into the psychology field, into mathematics. All that material exists there, and that material supports what the body feels, supports what the common people feel. So it is there, and now the message to the student is, you can learn architecture, but you have to go outside architecture school. However, there's an enormous amount of material that's available, and there are summer courses from or in many different countries that teach more traditional architecture. And there is the Building Beauty course that's a master's program that teaches Christoph Alexander's Nature of Order. So if you look for them, if you dig, and if you're intelligent, you can find these sources of architectural learning that offer what the mainstream architecture departments do not offer. So it's inconvenient, but at least that's available now. And lastly, and more importantly, for the client, if you're the client, take a little time to be informed that if you're the client, you insist on finding an architect who can create a beautiful building. Don't go with the fashion, because the fashion is likely to give you a terrible building. So ignore the fashion. If it's it's difficult to ignore the fashion, but if you really want to do good to humanity and the earth, find an architect that will create a beautiful adaptive building. And there are many in every country in the world now. There is a network that if you look, you can find architects that have the skill set to create an adaptive building in every country in the world, because there are associations for traditional architecture, for Alexander patterns. Because of the internet, now this is doable. It was not doable 30 years ago. 30 years ago, you were lost. You had to accept all this nonsense from the collective mainstream.
Okay, that's a good, and I think I really like this advice of like, listen to your body. I mean, this applies like same to let's say non-architects, let's say, for example, clients you mentioned, or like every lay person, right? Like, listen to your real actual feeling, and also like don't let your opinion get overwritten by what you just said already by newspaper and the press. I mean, stick to your real intuition, let's say, but that's basically right. And that applies, I think, both to, let's say, non-architects, so lay people, right? And also to architect and architect students. So if you feel uncomfortable, I mean, I also did that, what I said before. When I feel uncomfortable, like in a public space or in front of a building, I ask myself, like, why and where do I feel comfortable? So if I think, for example, I think the most comfortable feeling I can get is when I take a walk somewhere in the forest. I really like hiking in the forest. So there you have all of it, right? You have the whole density of nature, where we talked regarding the biophilic. So, but everyone has to find out for itself. But I think it's a good like advice. Listen to your intuition, right? What do you really like? How do you feel? What makes you feel good, and where do you feel good? And then stick to that, right? So this is
exactly. And architecture students should learn from the courses on material science and construction, and sort of ignore the other courses. I know they have to pass the courses to get a degree, but the real architectural knowledge they have to seek outside the present architectural academia.
Yeah, okay. And for sure buy the book of Christopher Alexander, the pattern language, which I will link. Okay, thank you for the interview.